Hi, everyone, and welcome to our February 5th Board of Education work session tonight. Thank you for trying out our new format. We actually have a number of new things going on. One is we tried to structure the room so that it was warmer and friendlier and closer. But I think we're still working on that distance gap. So, but thank you, those who sat in the front seat. We appreciate it. And as we had emailed, this meeting tonight will not have a public comment segment. We're just trying a new way. And thank you to Tony, because this was your idea, which I thought was really good. A way to maximize public comment and make it most meaningful. So tonight we're going to hear a lot of presentations. We're going to have Laura and Tesfa talking about special ed. Then we're going to talk about the budget. Then afterwards, as soon as the video link is ready, that's going to be emailed to our school community, and you can then respond to us with comments, questions, and we will address those at our next board meeting on February 26th, and we will also have a public comment time at that. And you can also let us know how you find this works. It won't be for every segment, but we figured since this is a long evening, very substantive, it gives us all the time to digest. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Tony.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And just to piggyback on what Lisa shared, the idea behind this structure is to try to provide as much information to everyone so that we're kind of working off of the same information. So whatever conversations and discussions the board are having with us internally, externally, everyone has access to that information. So when we are ready to discuss different matters, whether it's related to special education, whether it's related to the budget, we're all working off of the same information point, right? So there's no, I heard this, this was said here. What we're going to talk about tonight is what everyone is going to have before them as a board, and then what our community will also have access to. So we're pretty excited about trying to sort of flatten the walls, if you will, and be transparent about this process. And not that that wasn't the case before. In the past, similar, mindset was there. It just a different approach. So we're hopeful that you will be able to access information tonight that would inform your perspective and inform any other questions and pieces of information you'd like to know more about. As it relates to follow-up, and I'm not quite sure how many questions we're going to get after tonight's meeting, so there'll be two options. You can either respond to an email with your questions and concerns, or you'll be able to fill out a Google survey where you can submit any questions or concerns. Depending on how many come out, we may not get to all of them on February 26th, but then we have March 5th and we have March 19th. It'll be an ongoing discussion, and the budget is quite pliable throughout that process, right? And that has implications for staffing, it has implications for positions, what have you. So your input is going to be critical, not just through that point, but also beyond. So just know, just to sort of piggyback on what Lisa shared, if we didn't answer it on February 26th, it doesn't mean that it's not getting answered. It just may be that we're compartmentalizing the information in a different way or organizing it in some other way, so we make sure we get to everything and we give everything the amount of time it deserves. So several meetings coming up for that. So that's that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for coming out. This is great. It is like a faculty meeting. As a former building principal, whenever we had a faculty meeting in like an auditorium, everyone was in the back of the room. No one sat near the front of the room. It was great. So we got into the habit of taping off all the back of the seats, so people had to sit in the front. So watch out next time. No, so we have a few events coming up just as announcements. We are not going to follow the traditional format, so we're not highlighting anything. We'll do that on February 26th. But we have a SEPTA coffee happening this week, Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Is that correct? It's happening. Yes? No? Not correct? 6:30. This is why it's good to come to a board meeting. It's in the evening. We know that. We have a late start on Friday, February 9th. You did get a blast email about that. We have a family dance at Hillside this Friday night as well. We have the Culture Shock at the high school also Friday night, and those are at different times, I think. So the Hillside dance is starting at 6. Culture Shock starts at 7. So if you have kids in both spaces, you can make it to both. We also have a kindergarten registration happening in next week, February 12th to February 15th. So if you have any neighbors who have little kids who are new to the community or have older kids and don't recognize that it's time to register, please send them out to do that. We have a health and safety meeting on February 13th at 1 o'clock. We have our next high school SEPTA coffee that's on February 13th at 6:30-ish, some point. And then we have a midwinter recess happening from February 19th to the 23rd, and there's an additional board meeting happening Monday, February 26th. So that was not on the original calendar, but it was in several of the blasts that you received. So at this point, we transition into the work session, and we're going to start with special ed.
We were just going to give a special shout out because at our February 26th meeting, we'll talk about things that have happened in the past with slides,
Yes.
but we did want to give a shout out to a really special event that took a ton of work, and that was Casino Night, sponsored by our fabulous Yellow Jackets Booster Club. So thank you so much for raising all that money and giving us all a really, really, really fun night. So thank you, Booster Club. I will give one more shout out to Culture Shock. If you haven't had the pleasure of attending that, it's really wonderful. Created by students for everybody, where students celebrate different parts of their background and they bring other students to celebrate with them, and it's really extraordinary. And one last thing, I want to give a nice welcome back to...
Oh, yeah, you just beat me to it.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
All right. To our high school principal, Lou Pietro, who has been out with surgery for 2 weeks. Welcome back, Lou, and thank you to Melissa Hardesty for being the interim principal while he was away. That is no easy job without an assistant to help you, so thank you and welcome back.
And you have to give Lou credit. It's his first day back, and he knew that this meeting was happening, and he still showed up. So he knew it would be a long day, but he was here. So thank you very much, Lou, and to Melissa for holding down the fort. She's somewhere back there as well. Thank you, high school team. So we're going to get started with our work session, and in the work session format, we're going to try to be timely, not because we don't want to have all the information necessary shared, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we're starting with special education. We are theoretically, hopefully, allocating an hour for this part of the discussion, and we will turn it over to you. To our community members, just so you understand, this is a presentation to the Board of Education, so it's their opportunity to ask questions that may or may not be reflective of questions you have. And again, we will follow up with the opportunity to submit questions that we can follow up on at future meetings. So Tesfa and Laura, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, Laura Sullivan is our Director of Special Education, and Tesfa Stewart is our Assistant Director of Special Education, and they are really quite a dynamic duo who have been working really, really diligently over the last 7 or 8 months together to be responsive to the audit and have developed this action plan. And so I thank you for all of your hard work, and thanks to SEPTA for partnering with us on that work. So turn it over to you.
Okay, so thank you for letting us speak tonight. We are going to try and stay within our hour limit. Tesfa's got his timer there, so he'll cut me off when we have to. But we're here tonight to share with you an update on the Hastings-on-Hudson Special Education Action Plan. As most people know, this journey was divided into 6 recommendations. Tonight we want to share with you a broad overview to highlight just some of the work that has happened thus far. I just want you to note that the information provided tonight does not encompass all of the work that the district has started, but just a glimpse into where we're moving towards. I could easily speak an hour on each one of the recommendations. So because there are 6 of them, we've kind of broken them up into smaller parts. So we're going to try and stick with that hour. So the first one, we did not go in order. We kind of, so if you follow the recommendations in the action plan that you have, we're not going through 1 through 6. We're actually starting with number 6. And the reason why we chose number 6 is because we felt it's a foundation of everything that we do. Number 6 is to build positive relationships and communication strategies between school and community. So we know that without the positive relationships between teachers and students, between teachers and staff and parents and within the whole school, that is your foundation to be able to move forward. So 6 was broken into 2 components. There were 2 indicators. 6A was to build positive relationships between school and the community by continuing to facilitate open discussions, parent meetings, and professional development for staff regarding best practices for communication for families. Can I hear you, or do I need to speak closer?
I would just
to
turn
this?
it to your, yeah, just to be safe.
Can everyone in the back hear as well? Okay.
Just turn it a little towards you. There you go. It's got good pickup. Yeah, it picks up.
I think we should note when we're looking at these indicators, we looked at, there's 3 specific things we're looking at. We're looking at the indicator itself, well 4 actually. The indicator itself, the goals pertaining to the indicator, the steps to meet these goals, and the timeline. So these are the 4 components we looked at when we broke up the goals individually.
So under 6A, we're not going through all of the goals because it would be a long night. So we're just kind of going to highlight some of the things. We did, one of the things that is under this indicator is to develop a vision and a mission statement. We feel really strongly that in order to be able to do this, we need to work hand in hand with the Director of Learning Instruction, so thank you for that new position. We're looking forward to collaborating with that person. I think often special education lives in a silo, and I think that's because we don't look at it as a K-12. We see special education as a K-12, and we see general education as a K-12, but we don't see education as a K-12. And I think that's where our vision really needs to come from, is an umbrella of K-12 that encompasses general education and special education together, so that it will bring us out of that silo and back into a K-12 community. So some of the things when we do get to working on the vision with the Director of Learning and Instruction is to think about what does an incoming student look like, and what will they look like upon graduation. How do we build capacity to provide appropriate support in the least restrictive environment while promoting independence, and that is ultimately our end goal. So those are just some of our thoughts, but we will dig deeper into the vision as we as the Director of Learning Instruction joins us. We are working on the development of building a district-wide MTSS plan. I'm going to talk more about that under Recommendation 5. Under Recommendation 6 also came disseminate the parent survey to all staff as part of professional development, ensure staff is aware of parent concerns. We met last spring with SEPTA, and we talked about how we were going to disseminate that. For those of you, there were 2 surveys that were done. One was done several years ago, and then one was done, I think, 2 years ago. So we, rather than disseminating that, every year, every school is assigned an indicator to monitor special education. We don't choose the indicators, they rotate through, so you'll get through all of them. Our indicator last year was indicator 8. I want to thank all of the families that helped by filling out that survey. So every family with a child with special needs received a survey, and they could either complete it online or do it by a hard copy. And I just want to share really quickly, we got the results of the survey back in January. So it was based on a 1 to 6 scale. Number 1, very strongly agree, all the way to 6, which was very strongly disagree. In the first category, school efforts to partner with parents, we received a 1.63, which is between very strongly agree and strongly agree. In the question that related to teachers and administrators, we received a 1.97, again, right between our very strongly agree and strongly agree. In terms of the school, and under each one of these categories were lots of individual questions. We received a 2.8, which is right on target with strongly agree. And impact of special education services on your family. Over the past year, special education services have helped me and or my family, and there were several sub-questions. And we received a 2.23, which is aligned with strongly agree. And the final was parent participation. This one was based on always, almost always, all the way down to never, which was number 6, and we received a 2.25, which is between almost always and frequently. So we had the number of surveys with majority of responses that agree or better or frequently or better were, we were in the 90th percentile. So I think that this, kind of speaks to building the collaboration and fostering relationships and rebuilding. Some of the other things that we've...
She's going to pause at the end of the indicator and then...
Sorry. Some of the other things that we've done is we've increased community communication through our Special Education Today newsletter, which comes out quarterly. We've continued with our coffees. We now, this year, have regular meetings with our SEPTA board, Tesfa and I do. We've included a great deal of community participation in just the very beginning of our SOPM, which I'll talk more about during Recommendation 2. We have a website link for parents to ask questions. It's monitored daily, and it's open for any parent to ask any question. We'll either direct you to where a person can help you, or Tesfa or I will answer it. It also talks about training staff on policies and evaluation procedures to decrease inaccurate classifications. We have researched and ordered new evaluation measures for students with lower cognitive functioning in order to ascertain measurable and valuable information. That has already happened. We are in the process of researching and developing a working understanding of the 13 disabilities. You have the state laws, but really, what does it mean to us as the Hastings-on-Hudson district? And determine if our current evaluations match our descriptions. We also want to, under 6A, was to employ a toolkit of resources for engaging families in the community as partners in education. Dr. Katzman had actually recommended a special program, which is a toolkit. I have it. We've looked at it. And in discussions with the SEPTA board, we feel at this point it's not necessary to bring it out, as many barriers have been crossed and communication and trust is continuing to improve. We also want to prepare educators for two-way communication with families. Again, some of the things that we've done is the Google Forms, opened our lines of communication, the SEPTA coffees, and I think the biggest one that is going to support us through the communication is the development of the Standard Operating Procedure Manual, which we'll refer to as SOPM throughout the evening. And then there was 6B. 6B was to build effective communication strategies between the district and the community with a focus on district practices that include communication protocol, guidance on the role of the case managers. So at this point, we have already redesigned the case manager letter that is sent home to parents. This past September, many people got a case manager letter that had a lot more information on it. We've already redesigned that. That will include related service providers, so when you start your school year, the parents know who their case manager is, their contact information, who's their OT, who's their PT, who's their speech and language, and all of that information, so that they are not trying to figure it out by on their own. We're giving that to them. So that has already been designed. It will be rolled out in September. And then a lot of this, we also created a quarterly letter that is sent home to parents when 5 or more missed sessions have happened and have not been made up at that point. This was part of the speech and language missed sessions. This we actually rolled out in September of, kind of in September of 2016. We changed it a little bit. We met with the SEPTA board, and we're again started that in September 2017. And then parents have the option of letting us know if they want to have those sessions made up. At this point, I don't believe we had any letters that went out for the first or second quarter. With the increase in the speech and language person that we brought in this year, we've been able to really maintain and do makeup sessions in a timely fashion. And that is it for recommendation 6. Any questions?
I just wondered, on the survey, what kind of response rate did you get?
On the survey for
How many
the indicator,
participated? Yeah, how many participated?
we had 74 families that participated. They could only participate for one family. So if you had more than one student, if you have more than one child that has an IEP in your family, you could only fill it out for one child. One per family. So if you had 2 students, if you had twins, whichever it was, you could only fill it out once. So we had 74 families participate.
It's about a third of our special ed parent population, right?
Yeah.
What did you say, Tony?
It's about a third of our special ed population parents. Any other questions on indicator 6?
I have a question about the case manager. So, so the letter that goes out indicates who the case manager is for that child for the entire school year.
Correct.
And that's for children with IEPs?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, and that started this September?
It started in some areas this September, but it will be much more formalized in September of this coming September. It'll be more consistent. It will be a K-12 rollout where it will be the same across the board.
Okay, so on this letter, it will have the case manager and then all of the related services and the name of that person.
And their contact information.
And their contact information. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I guess I do. So do you have an idea, maybe as a percentage of the students, how many students spend the bulk of their time? Or like, how does it break up in terms of the amount of time that children are in gen ed, and then some needs to be pulled out or have special ed services? Because it seems to me that we don't have that many that are really exclusively not brought into the classrooms, into the general ed.
How many of them are not mainstreamed?
Right.
Is that what?
Yeah.
I think that's, that's more or less based on the need of the individual child, so it's case by case. There's some kids that are in a way more restrictive environment based on their needs, and there are kids that are mainstreamed more based on their needs. So it's really child by child as far as.
I understand, but just as a population as a whole, do we have an idea? Because that's really what there was a lot of discussion about.
I think I know the question that you're asking. What percentage do we have that are in 80% of the day?
Yes.
At the bottom of the IEP, you'll see that it calculates itself in terms of this child is in the general education population 80 or more percent of the day, 60 or more percent of the day. I do not have those numbers, though they are something that I can pull out.
I mean, it's just kind of.
I can say off the top of my head that we have a large percentage that are in 60% and above.
With gen ed.
With general education, they're mainstreamed. Yeah. Mhm.
Could I just add into that, and I think it's maybe just more of a general question. In the population that Eileen's talking about, are we talking about kids who are in communication classes? Because unless you're in a communication class, you're going to be mainstreamed, even if it's just for like gym and art. And that in and of itself can make up a large percentage. So I think while the data is good, I think we need to be clear that when we're talking about that percentage, you're looking at probably some children who are extraordinarily, they have great needs, that they can't be in a general education setting, and you're really looking at sort of extremes. Would that be correct?
Well, it's going to look at all 256 of our students. So it's going to take it, well, maybe 240 because we wouldn't be looking at preschool, so or our incoming. So I would say yes, but it's going to range from our children that are in 612s. We have children that are out of district, even beyond what's in the district. We have children that are out of district that are in full self-contained. They're standalone programs. They're not even in mainstreamed buildings. So that would be 100% out of the day. And then they don't even really count the time that they're mainstreamed for PE or things like such. They take what they do is they calculate if you are the number of services. So if you are getting ICT, ELA, ICT, math, those don't count. Those are not part, you're with your general education peers. But once you get into speech and language, or a special class, or an OT, or a PT, or a counseling, any of those go towards your out of general education percentages.
Okay.
I do want to add that also, and this is not maybe the conversation right now, but just to fill the board in, when we look at our continuum, which is something we're trying to do annually, we definitely look to, as appropriate as possible, try to give the students as much mainstream opportunity built into the program as possible. So that is definitely something that's definitely on our radar to build those supports, because like Laura said, our main goal is to build that independence for the students. From K to 12, we want to slowly support student independence to be in a mainstream environment as much as possible.
And recognize that journey can be somewhat fluid, and where a child may have gone to an increased part of their day in general education. There may have been other issues that arise as a result of that, which might require pulling back a little bit or reformatting the experience. And we've had several conversations about that even this year. So
it's actually referred to as TORC. That's the acronym that's used. I don't like the language of the acronym. It's called time out of regular classroom, but that's what that's what the percentage is. So when you're creating your IEPs, you have to fill in a TORC in terms of it being yes or no, and then that's what it calculates at the bottom for you. The state calculates that. Okay, recommendation number 2. This has 3 components to it. The overall recommendation is to create systems that support effective management of special education supports and services. In one of the things that they talked about under 2A, there's 3 parts to this, is develop a human capital strategy to provide appropriate staffing where needed, training, and professional development. Some of the things that came up in the audit were for us to look at our occupational therapists on a full-time staff. Right now, we currently contract out with our occupational therapists based on the research that we did. taking into account our population, taking into account our current OT providers, we felt that it was best to continue with continuing to contract out with our occupational therapist and our physical therapist. Everybody else is part of our staff. There was a recommendation to increase speech and language therapist. We did do that, and we're also recommending to increase it a little bit more for the upcoming year. It's asked us to assess the roles and the responsibilities of all of our staff members. This is something that we have not yet begun, but what we're looking at in terms of our steps would be to review the current job descriptions, collect data from staff regarding current responsibilities, review roles, review responsibilities for efficiency and effectiveness, and then link to the continuum of services and student needs. So it is a big task that we have to still do, but we will, our timeline for that is really looking at by December of 2018, because we need to go through special education, school psychologists, and the teacher assistants and aides. One of the things that we did do with the teaching assistants and teacher aides,
we wanted to make a more concerted effort to offer the teacher aides and teacher assistants support. So one of the things we looked at in August or September when the school year first started, we did a needs assessment survey for the aides and the assistants based on where they felt their needs were as far as what they wanted to learn more about in the special education process. Based on that information, we conducted PD services for the TAs. The first one, like I said, we looked at where their needs assessments were. The second one, we met with them, we unpacked the IEP documents, we looked at the accommodations, we looked at the supports, and we had this teacher aides and the teacher assistants do a scavenger hunt to really unpack the IEP document and look how they could best support the students. So this is something that's ongoing. We plan to do this as much as possible to meet with these support staff personnel to offer them as much in-service, as much education to help to better support the students.
They actually truly appreciated that. They were working with their IEPs. So we weren't just giving them general IEPs. So they were working with the students' IEPs that they are currently working with. In terms of evaluating current professional development model and innovation where needed. So again, Tesla just gave you a small example of some of the PD that we're doing. We've done a great deal more. Do you want to jump into to that part?
We're also looking at the way we assign one-to-one support with the TAs and the teachers' assistants. We're also designing, we're going to roll out hopefully Wednesday at Hillside to start with. There's a request form for the one-to-one assistant, and in this request form there has to be a detailed plan in which to better support the students. So we're not looking just to give these supports arbitrarily. We want to make sure there's a clear and concise plan with what the support staff is going to do for the student, and how are we still want to promote the model of independence. So how can we promote that gradual release from a student needing one-to-one support through the whole day to half day to none at all. So we want, at the end of our day, is to move our children to the least restrictive environment, but it has to be done with a plan. You know, they have to have the documents, they have to have the information, they have to have the know-with-all to know what to do to help support the students to gradually release to that independence. Also, we did a in-service for some new staff members and some old staff members, focusing on the PLEPs and accommodations. The PLEPs is the pleasant levels of performance on the IEP. So a PLEP is the portion of the IEP document. If you look at it in a layman's terms, you should be able to look at a PLEP and understand as much as you can see about a child. It should be a cheat sheet for any adult. So we want to make sure those are tighter. We did a PD for some of the staff members, I believe 2 weeks ago. And we are also encouraging our staff to do out-of-district PDs to get as much knowledge as possible. And I'll talk about more of the professional development we're doing with the language acquisition versus learning disability, I think, later in this document.
We've also continued our ICT trainings. We brought it now into the middle school. Last year we had the high school teachers that were trained. Hillside has had it for some time now, and this year we brought it into the middle school as well. We continue with coaching dates, which happen throughout the year, so all 3 buildings have opportunities to meet with our trainers. And on one-to-one, they also, the trainers, some teachers invite the trainers into their classrooms to to observe a lesson and then to sit with them and provide feedback. So that's been pretty successful this year as well.
We also have had the aides and some of the support staff work with our behavior specialists to better understand how to deal with in-class behaviors. And also on November 2nd, we had them work with the school counselors to also look how to support more of our challenging students as well.
And then we're also continuing with CPI training, which is crisis prevention intervention. We have 3 trainers. We have Jesse Merchant, Dr. Scott Tesler, and Dennis Kiley. They have trained several staff members. We have a whole handful of staff members, many administrators, teachers, and teaching assistants and aides. That is something that we're going to continue in June. Hopefully the last week of June, we'd like to propose it. So we'll roll that out to allowing teachers and teaching assistants and teacher aides to participate, and it will be 2 sessions, because you need to have 2 days. I think it's 16 or 15 hours. So Dennis, Scott, and Jesse will be running that for us the last week of June. So hopefully we'll get a great deal of training out of that one. The next part of the recommendation 2.
Or can I
We'll
just
wait
ask
till
you
the
one
end.
question before, a quick question? Could you just go back and explain what the thinking was to continue to contract out for PT and OT?
Oh, okay. Because we looked at who our current providers are, and to be quite honest, they're extremely strong. They've been with us for years. There's been no turnover in many, many years. They have strong relationships with families. I think they're extremely effective. I've heard positive feedback from families, teachers, and students themselves. So we would lose that. And I think that's an important component of who the person is. So yeah, that was a big factor that went into that.
I have a quick question too. Sorry, they're fantastic. I have to say they're really great. I just have a quick question though. Is there a big difference between contracting out and hiring a full-time person in terms of cost?
I think there's 2 components. There's cost and there is flexibility.
Okay.
So you have a lot more flexibility when you're contracting out. In terms of days, hours, minutes, times, makeups. They're working for their agency and we're paying them by the hour, as opposed to, they bill us for everything they do if they're filling out an IEP or they're updating the annual review or they're working on IEP Direct, all the way down to team meetings to parent meetings. So it's a separate billing, and so I think there's a couple things. I think there's a relationship. I think there's the employee, the people themselves of who they are. I think it is more fiscally what's the word?
Responsible.
Prudent, responsible, to continue on our path, and it gives us an incredible amount of flexibility.
Would that also be the reason why sometimes you hear of related services being provided after school or before school hours? Because they can do
Because
that?
they can.
Okay. And also for summer services as well, they have the flexibility of coming in if need be, correct?
Summer services is purely contract.
Okay.
So summer services, we would work with our speech and language, whether it would be our speech and language providers, they become hourly.
Okay.
They're no longer, they're not in their 10-month.
Right.
So all our summer services you can be looked at as contract or hourly based.
Okay, thank you.
2B is the biggest one. This is create a standard operating procedure manual and SOPM for special education to ensure clarity and consistency of special education processes. As much as this is the biggest thing that we are working on, it is also probably the most fun, because it allows us to really dig deep and work with individual teachers, groups of parents. I've had individual parents come to me to share things. So we've done working groups, we've done individual groups, and it's been a lot of fun. What I will say is, so far, our table of contents includes 200 subsections. So this is something that Tesfa and I could probably sit down and write in a month if we did nothing else. But obviously, that's not a Hastings document. That's a Tesfa and Laura document. So to go through these 200 subsections, as much of big portions of it are just plain law, but to give you just a quick example, the continuum of services, which is your resource room, your integrated co-teaching, and your special class and related services, there's laws. There's just flat guidance in terms of what we can and cannot do. But we worked with a group of teachers, general education, special education, and related services in each building. And then we worked with parents in each building level. And we looked at what did we think was a working definition beyond the law, what was a working definition that really fit Hastings. And interestingly enough, they kind of both overlapped because we did it separately. So now Tesfa and I will merge those definitions. We're going to create a K-12 committee that will have parents and teachers from each building, and then we'll look to see to come up with Hastings on Hudson's definitions within the law, but within our own guidance and thinking of what does a resource room look like, what does an integrated co-teaching look like, and what does a special class look like.
Based off this practice, we thought it would be beneficial to do this annually because the needs of the community, needs of the students will change year to year. So it doesn't mean that we're going to offer 10 new courses annually, but if something needs to be tweaked, removed, I forgot the parent group we met with, but somebody made an analogy. If we start building this repository of services, we could shelve things we don't need and we could add them as we need be based on the needs of the community, because everything we want to focus on is to make it student first or community first and then build from there.
So we could put it on the shelf, take it back out when we need it, and that really came from a parent.
I'm still confused just by, I guess, what this document is ultimately going to look like, because when I hear standard operating manual, no, I know, and I would think, well, gosh, Scarsdale's got to have one, Irvington's got to have one. Can we riff off of that? But I like what I'm hearing about personalizing it to Hastings. But I guess I'm still, I guess we'll offer certain things, like we may offer a resource room that one of our neighbors doesn't. Maybe if you could just fill me in just on and I'm going to throw a few things out to you, don't have to answer all of them. I guess, in what ways is it standard versus in what ways is it personal to us? And some of the overarching themes we've been talking about, like unsiloing special ed and gen ed, will that be something that this will help with? Will this be where our vision is? Is it almost a strategic plan, or does it have aspects of that? So I guess maybe if you could sort of flesh out a little, like I said, when I hear standard operating procedure, to me it sounds like a book that every district would have the same information, in.
They don't.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I would say 85% of the document is legally binding, and you're sort of constricted with that. And the continuum is just one portion of the SLPM. So I just want to make it clear that the continuum is not the SLPM. That's like maybe page 5 of the SLPM. And there's a lot more deeper details as far as definition, class sizing, services offered. There's a lot of detail in the SLPM. So the SLPM is, I want to say, maybe a legal guideline of special education of what you cannot do, what's offered, what's not offered. And you can take certain laws, certain definitions, because those don't change. That's New York State law. But the experience, I guess, for a K-12 student is going to be different here. And that's where we want to make the details in the SLPM document to say, all right, this child starts in kindergarten and they have this disability, and by the time they're a 12th grader, if we provide our shelf of service, legally binding, they'll look like this by the time they're done. And the SLPM could be the guidance for anybody. We want to make this a living document. So like I said, things will change, and we also want to make it public document. We don't want to have this like this is our little secret, like it's going to be open for everybody.
I think it changes the experience from being somewhat nebulous to being much more, clear and continuous for families. So a lot of questions will be answered in a pretty straightforward way, but it allows families to have a sense of, all right, I'm starting this journey. My child might be getting ready to be classified. I can go and access this manual to really understand what that might be like. So.
And where it becomes more personal is, yes, there is a process when you're going through a referral process. How do you refer a child? Again, there's laws in terms of days, the timeline, and all of that. But what's not working in Hastings? Where are we lacking in communication? Where is the breakdown? What do we need to do better at so that parents who are going through this as a first-time experience, it's not easy. So how can we make it easier for them so it becomes a guide, a resource for them, a support for them, beyond just opening up the New York State regs that you can download where it says, okay, you have 30 days to this, 10 days to this. That's not the emotional piece. So I guess it's trying to bring more of the emotional piece into it and make it much more reflective. So there are SOPMs out there that are hundreds and hundreds of page long, and there are SOPMs that are 25 pages long. So we're not looking at the 25-page ones because I don't think it's going to do us due service, you know, and in the long run.
You know, ideally, you know, I guess the last thing with SOPM, we don't want it to be a sort of a check off a list, like, all right, make sure the parent has this paper signed for it, and we met our legal requirement. You know, we wanted to make it, I guess, a real document that can make sense to somebody walking off the street that wants to get support for their child. If that makes sense.
Great, thank you. And then the last part of recommendation 2 is 2C, improve the use of data collection systems and create alignment between all district data collection systems. So I think I've spoken to you guys about this. This was really about the disconnect between our the student management system, eSchool Data, and IEP Direct. They were not linked. So that was a communication barrier, plus it was a difficult system to manage. And when Dr. Katzman was here, she was just hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock because this data was not matching this data, and nothing was matching up. So we put in a Centris, which is a basically web that flows and has merged the two of them. So every evening I get an email that says that they merged, and it will tell me if something is out of alignment. So if an address is different because somebody updated an address or a phone number through Michelle Porter or through registration, it will automatically merge it into IEP Direct that night. And if there's something there's a problem with, we get an alert, and that we can work with that you know, immediately. Some of the other things under 2C were to alleviate parent confusion with software. I think we've gone to Google Classroom. I can ask the principals. I think mostly in the middle school and high school, everything is really done by Google Classroom. Again, we're trying to increase our communication through what we're doing on our end. And we're also looking, we met with a group of teachers today, special education teachers from each building, in terms of how can we do a better job in monitoring our goals. So progress monitoring for our goals. This was not really part of 2C, but because it talked about data collection, we thought that this was a place where it would fit. So every child has goals in their IEP, and there's many, many different ways to monitor progress. We're not dictating a way, because what works for each teacher is individualized, but there is a program called GoalWorks, which we're looking at, and we may pilot it a little bit in terms of it is a way to support the teachers in having a much more systematic alignment of the monitoring of goals, with charts, with reminders. You haven't done a trial for the student. You know, Jody hasn't had a trial done in 2 weeks, and there's alerts and reminders. So it really keeps you on top of the goals. So we're researching that more.
Within IEP Direct, we're also trying to, well, we purchased already, but we're rolling out, to be fully rolled out hopefully by next year, a document repository. So if there's any documents, evaluations done independently within school, they'll all be housed in one document repository. So everything is centralized, it's scanned, it's uploaded into IEP Direct. So any teachers, any service providers with access to that student, they could view the documents and have a complete history on the child without having to go to an office somewhere off and dig through a filing cabinet. It's all centralized in one storage place digitally.
So we've started it with any of the new reports that are coming in, but it's a huge job. It's scanning all of our thousands of files. But I think when it's up and running, it's going to be an amazing, because it will allow teachers to see a report or an evaluation that was done 2 years ago, that you may just be looking at the numbers and the percentages on the current IEP, but you really didn't have the meat of it. So this, you're just clicking on the student, you're clicking on all of the reports that have been completed on this child, and they're right there for you to read it. You don't have to come into the special education office to check out the file, to go look through it and find it.
I will just say, since I am the person who always goes nutty over data security, this is obviously probably the most sensitive data that we have in our school. I'll withhold my personal views, but I'll say, if we are going in this direction, can we please just put every digital protection around this, and password changes weekly. I mean, whatever we can do, because the data is just too sensitive, and we know that hacks are inevitable. We cannot protect against them fully, but let's do whatever we can in our power on this.
So what I can
I
tell
don't mean
you
to sound
that-
chastising.
No.
It's how I feel anytime I read about a data breach or putting sensitive information out into the ether.
So what this is this actually isn't a new program. It is part of IEP Direct. So we use IEP Direct for all of our information. This was just an add-on purchase that we could do. And anybody that works with IEP Direct knows that you are asked to switch your password, I think, approximately every 6 weeks. So IEP Direct is really tight on their security. I can't speak to, everything, but this is not a separate program. We did not purchase a document repository. It is built into IEP Direct. It's just a matter of, did we want to purchase it for more money?
I'm sorry, I had questions. A couple more. So going back to, I think, 2 bullets ago. So in terms of training, in terms of teachers trying to meet goals and monitoring goals, that's where it comes from monitoring goals, goals work, et cetera, et cetera. Are teachers, is there discussion around when a child is not on track for either meeting their goals, or there's a concern that a child may not meet a goal? Because a parent would then receive something in, quarterly, or I don't know if it's quarterly now or if it's trimester.
Depending on the school. So quarterly is from 5th grade to 12th grade.
Okay.
And then Hillside is they get them 3 times a year, their progress reports.
Okay, so I guess the question is, when parents get this, if a student is not progressing satisfactorily, so they're not on track for necessarily meeting their goals, it seems to me, it just seems to me like it's incumbent upon the parent to then reach out to teachers, to case managers, to guidance counselors, whoever it is. And if a parent is not either understanding of the document, or is not really, just doesn't know much about special education, they might not know to reach out. So what is put in place? Is there anything in place in which teachers, when kids are on track for not meeting their goals, teachers, case managers, whatever, they gotta reach out?
I absolutely agree with you. No, there is nothing in place. I think it depends on the case manager that you have, but I think it's something that we can definitely put into place. I think it's something that we could probably add to our case manager letter, in terms of, and part of when you look at our job description, when we talked about earlier about the job descriptions and the roles, I think that is something that should be added under the responsibilities of the case manager. I think it's smart. It should not be the parent's job to reach out to the case manager. Yes, they always have that option too,
right,
and they may have concerns that the teacher
time
doesn't. I'm not going to say, they may have different concerns than the teacher. They may see different things than the teacher does. But if you are seeing a lack of progress, I do think that our case managers should be responsible for reaching out to the parents. We don't have that in place, but I do think it's something that we can put in place.
Okay, that would be great. I have another question, if it's okay. In terms of PD, so it looks like there's PD that's going on currently in the middle school for ICT classes. There was PD last year for ICT classes as well. Is there PD for gen ed teachers in terms of how to they're going to have students in their classes with IEPs. Just because you have an IEP, as many of us know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're in an ICT class. So you can have a gen ed teacher could have a student in a gen ed class who has an IEP. So are gen ed teachers getting professional development as well in terms of special education and what to look for and practices, et cetera?
Right now, the ones that are getting professional development are the ones that are paired with their special education teachers. So if you're an ICT teacher, general education teacher, and you're teaching an ICT class, you've been part of that training. So, you know, if you look at the years that we've been doing this at Hillside, most of our teachers have rotated through it because we've switched up some pairs. But no, these ICT trainings are for only the general education and the special education pairs at the time.
Is there something that could be provided for gen ed teachers, even if it's not the same, you know, type of professional development as you would give a pair of teachers in an ICT class? But I don't know. I just think that gen ed teachers need, in general, to be aware and need more training. I think most general education teachers, if you've been through, you know, any college, yes, you've taken basic special education courses, but that really doesn't prepare you. So to the extent possible, I would strongly hope that that's something that this district would do.
I would say it's a great idea, and I look forward to when the Director of Learning and Instruction is hired as soon as possible, because this, what you're speaking to, Christina, is basically an example of how we don't want to be siloed anymore, and we want to look at things as a K-12. It's not just about special education. It's not just about general education. How do we provide opportunities for professional development across the board that is for all students, for all teachers? And that's where I think the silo effect keeps coming up, and that's why having the Director of Learning and Instruction, the partnering, it really creates an umbrella.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about creating a culture. And rather, it gets rid of the us and them.
Exactly. So I think it's a good point, well taken. Okay, we're on recommendation 4 is to continue building in-district supports and services to support those who are currently educated in self-contained classes or out of district. So this is really us engaging in what we've talked about. What is our continuum? What can we add to it? What can we bring into it so that all of our students, you know, the goal is you always want your students supported in a least restrictive environment. A least restricted environment obviously would be the best choice to be in district. And even within district, how do we support them even with less in the least restrictive? We've done site visits on all of our out-of-district students, and I'll speak to some of the things that we did last year as well. We did a review of the needs and a review of the current continuum. Last year we were able to bring, and I should have brought the numbers, I think I presented it at last year's Board of Ed meeting, we were able to bring back a significant amount of parentally placed students in all 3 buildings, Hillside Middle School and the high school. We were also able to bring back some out-of-district students that we had placed. And part of that, I think, is because we sat with those parents and really listened to what were they feeling that they were needing, and what could we provide in the district to better support those students. I think it was successful. I think it's, you know, we implemented a ICT pre-algebra in the high school. We broke algebra up into 2 years, which made some of our students coming back. Now they had 2 years to work on algebra. We added an ICT Earth Science to 9th grade for those students that had not had the opportunity to have Earth Science in 8th grade, those that were returning. We added a special class to Hillside 2 years ago. That was kind of, we had our communications classroom and we had ICT, and we didn't really have anything in between. So we added a special class, which we are in our proposal is currently it's a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, but in our proposal, our budget proposal, we're asking to make it into a special class 1, 2, and a special class 3, 4. And we with the split, yeah. And then we also looked at adding a special class humanities to the high school, which the high school was able to figure out. I'm not going to speak to how. Melissa and Lou can explain. They somehow got it to be a credited course, because you have to remember, once you get to 9th grade, we're looking at credits. You do not get credits for a resource room. So by them enabling to create the curriculum for a special class humanities, where the children get the support that they need and they get the credit, that was a big thing.
Thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
We are looking in our proposal to add ICT geometry and ICT chemistry into the high schools. I can tell you that Lou did a survey in Westchester County high schools. Out of 17 districts, 6 districts do not offer ICT geometry or ICT chemistry. 8 districts only offer ICT geometry. 3 districts only offer ICT chemistry. And I said 6 offer none. So I would like to, we would be the pioneer of offering the both ICT geometry and ICT chemistry. And this also came from parents, us listening to parents in terms of where they wanted their children to have opportunities with support.
I just want to ask you, because I know when Dr. Katzman was presenting on the audit, there were definitely concerns from high school parents saying that they felt their kids, perhaps, may not have had services that they should have, so going into high school, they may need more support than maybe kids 5 years from now who have gotten the services. So I'm really pleased to hear this discussion about, amping up our ICT classes in the high school. So I don't know if this is really a question or a comment. I like that. Is that why? I mean, I guess we should look at it anyway. Is there anything else that we're looking at in that range to sort of help support those children in the high school who may not have gotten the supports in a more timely way? It
would be hard for me to speak to it in terms of that they didn't get the supports, but what I can say is that the high school teachers spent a great deal of time thinking about our 12th grade resource room. So when the students are in 12th grade, you have children, I'll kind of talk to 2 pieces. You have children who are in resource room because they need the academic support, they need the supplemental instruction, they need the organization. Then you have children who are in resource room who really need it for the organization. They don't need it for the academic support in their 12th grade. They've become much more independent. With the laws of resource room, it has to be a minimum of 3 hours a week. It has to be, cannot be more than 50% of your day. We have children who are in resource room for 80 minutes, but they probably only need about 30 minutes of the resource room. So we're looking to say, what can we do with these children that are making them, preparing them more for life ready, such as public speaking, such as providing opportunities for support with college essay writing in English and things like that. So unfortunately, you can't do that in a resource room because it's not supplementing instruction. So again, we're trying to be creative. We may have to go more restrictive, which is special class, and what would we call it? Special class transitional skills. So that's not a budgetary thing. It's because it's within just re-looking at what it would be. But that is definitely something that we're trying to figure out, and we've been working with the high school administration on that, and that really came from the teachers in terms of how do we get our 12th graders ready that don't need the academic support but do need the organization, the executive functioning support, and really make them life ready, college ready. Great. And Melissa Hardesty and I talk about this all the time about TSP program. We really, really think that we need to have a therapeutic support program. And this speaks to so many other things that will come up as we go through. But, we all know that mental health crisis is rampant across the nation. It is not, and Hastings is not exempt from it. So Melissa and I spent a great deal of time talking about what we need to do, what we can do to provide a therapeutic support program for our district. Any questions on that?
Is the therapeutic support program, obviously it's based on our individual needs, but has there been an effort to look at other programs and see what works there?
There has, yes.
And is there an outline yet, or is it just still in progress?
I think what we have a lot of stuff in our head. We
Right.
have done visits. We've seen things that are working, some things that are not working. But I think it's, again, personalizing it to Hastings, personalizing it to the population, the cohort of children that we have, and then just the foundation of what do you need? You need a great deal of mental health support. You need that support on hand. When you're looking at the profile of a child that's in a therapeutic support program, they are typically very bright children that just need the support and the emotional. So they are in AP classes, they're in SUPA classes, but they need that support in order to get them through that day. So those are a lot of the variables that we're taking into account.
Thank you.
Laura, I'm just going to throw out a 10-minute warning before our hour is up, in case you needed to prioritize, and we understand if you can't get through everything. No, your questions are great. They're really helpful.
So I have 3 more recommendations. Recommendation 1, I think, really speaks to.
We can certainly modify the time a little bit.
Well, I do not think many people in the audience want to.
Exactly. No, we're not going to sound the buzzer, but we just want to be mindful of another segment. And
would people be
last
okay if I took out 2 recommendations and then just went to recommendation 5 and spent the last 10 minutes talking about that one?
Do you want to tell us what?
Okay. So recommendation 3 is to examine evaluation procedures and continuously monitor the number of students determined eligible for special education services. This is really what Dr. Katzman talked about in terms of our over-identification of other health impairment. And I can speak to this in 2 seconds. I really don't think we have an over-identification of other health impairment. I think we are very much aligned with what is in our region. So there are maybe other districts that have in other regions of New York State, but I think if you looked at our percentages compared to neighboring, I do think that alignment. That does not mean, though, however, that we are not looking at all 13 of our classifications. And every reevaluation meeting, every annual review meeting, if we think that the classification no longer fits that child, I'm not saying that they don't need the support of a special education services, but if the classification no longer fits that child, then we need to look at the other 12 and see which one, because often children fall into categories that are more than one classification. Recommendation 1 was to create structures at the central office. This was really about the director of curriculum and instruction and TESFA. So we could talk all night about that. But that was about roles and responsibilities and the restructuring of our department and how to provide more time for us to be able to do things like this.
And I think, just so the board knows, it's a conversation that we've had ongoing to kind of parcel out the different things that Laura is working on as opposed to what TESFA is working on, as opposed to what they're working on jointly, right? And I think that'll play out as the year plays out, and we'll have a better sense of clearly delineating what that looks like moving forward.
Quick question about that in terms of central office, and I know a lot of it has, a lot of time is taken up with going to meetings and writing up the IEPs, et cetera, et cetera. To what extent have special education teachers received any professional development in how to write an IEP?
We spent a great deal of time in December. We spent a great deal of time in December going through the entire IEP, what their responsibilities were, what PLEPs, the present levels of educational performance, are supposed to look like, what they are in responsible for in the IEP, and then what the chair people are responsible for in the IEP. I think that because I think we've come a long way in the way our IEPs look. I think they look much more, I don't want to say unified, because every IEP is individualized, but it needs to have the same sections filled out. What's written in those sections is where the individualization happens, but we can't have any missing components. And I think we're almost there. I just had to run a meeting where we did have to rewrite an IEP. I think we've made a great deal of progress in that area in terms of not having missing components and things as that, but and still making sure that they're individualized. But I think that's training that's always going to happen on a yearly basis. I mean, I remember as a special education teacher, every year we receive training, and one of the things that we need to look at is how to write better goals.
And I think it also speaks to the broader issue in general education, and which will link to indicator number 5 as it relates to MTSS. It's just a shift in the way that we collect data on all kids. Tesfa touched on earlier going through a process when potentially the need for a one-on-one aid comes up. We need to go through a data collection process to do that. It's not just, okay, so I think this kid needs that, let's just do it. We need to progress monitor. We need to look back and assess and see what kids are doing over a period of time as we try different interventions. So that idea, the goal writing as it relates to IEPs is particular maybe to special ed teachers, but more broadly we're looking at how to identify student needs and track data over a period of time to see how kids are doing.
Yeah.
So.
I guess part of my concern stems from the fact that I think they indicated in the audit as well, is that if you go back, I think this year's there's definitely been a change, and even last year, but teachers haven't been involved in the IEP writing process.
Right.
And when you really think about it, it's the teacher who knows the child, whereas the administrator who's there and has a lot of great information and can include it. So it's really important that those teachers have that training.
And I think, like with the timelines on this audit, there's a lot of things that we say ongoing, annually.
Right.
So like there's certain things that have a finite end date, and there's certain things we have to do continually.
They won't end. It's just part of, I think that's part of where the SOPM comes in. Okay, the biggest part of the audit and the special education action plan, which I call our journey, is recommendation 5. It's to develop high quality and inclusive instruction within a multi-tiered system of supports. They refer to it throughout it as an MTSS. We know it, and we've referred to it through the years as RTI, response to intervention. A lot of this is general education, but again, I don't want to separate it out because I'm trying to avoid that. So I think it's again under the umbrella of how do we work together and collaborate together to make sure that we have supports for all children. So 5A, bless you. 5A is to establish a district-wide MTSS framework and implementation plan. This is up and running. This is going to take some time. Bless you.
Bless you. Means everything we're saying is true. That's what they say in the Greek culture. When someone sneezes while you're talking.
Keep sneezing, Sandra. Keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going. So we have Jim Wright. Anybody who's familiar with RTI knows that Jim Wright is the man of RTI. So he has been with the district. He did some consulting work in the spring, and then he's been working with the buildings this year.
Quick question right there. Sorry to jump in. So as far as Jim Wright goes, what exactly is he doing? And I guess I asked this because I've had PD with him. So how many days is he here? What is he specifically doing?
So again, I'm going to probably, does anybody want to jump up from there? Amy?
Jim Wright has come to Hillside last year.
I'm sorry.
Amy, you might have to come up here.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So Jim Wright had come to Hillside last year for a total of 2 times and then came again this year. And he worked with us in really framing our RTI program at Hillside. He helped us to establish the fact that we needed a universal screener. So this year we put a universal screener in place for all students K-4. And we also have a tiered system of support. So we've really analyzed exactly what each level of our system looks like. Our Tier 1, starting in the classroom with our teacher support, moving into Tier 2, provided by the classroom teacher or provided by a reading specialist, and then Tier 3 by our interventionists. So the different tiers of instruction get more supportive as students need more services. And what we end up doing is we give them multiple cycles of intervention, because what we've learned is that one intervention may not work, and they may need to try another intervention. And Jim has been really helpful in not only helping us to organize our system, but we also have created a toolkit so that teachers have the opportunity, when they see that there is a student who's struggling, we've created an online toolkit of intervention, so teachers have a resource to go to find suggestions of interventions. We also have created a system of meetings, so our teachers meet every other week to talk about students at a Tier 1 level and to collaborate and get ideas from each other about ways to support them. And then we have a PST, our problem-solving team, that comes together twice a cycle to discuss students and put in the necessary supports.
And he's planning on coming back this next year.
Oh, he's been here this year? And
No, I know this year
we-
and last year, and I think I see it
We
in this budget.
budgeted for next year as well.
Budgeting next year.
Yeah.
So what are his plans for next year?
It is to clarify the K-12 RTI plan and make sure that we have consistencies in place as it relates to starting, as young as kindergarten, although that's not necessarily the most common point to begin an intervention, through the high school. So,
Okay. Thank you.
thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
Part of under this is also talking about inclusive all grades and looking at students with disability and ELL students. So I'm going to have Tesfa just speak very quickly about a corrective action team that we put together.
Yeah, so since October, we've been working with a corrective action team comprised of psychologists, E&L teachers, speech and language teachers, general ed teachers, and special education teachers. And initially, when we started this this process, it was specifically and still is focused on E&L students. However, as we're unpacking this information, we're digging deeper, we see that these processes and these assessments and how we're looking at this information could apply to all kids. And we wanted to make it a more condensed form of how, when we do identify kids, we make sure that we've exhausted every resource and that the teachers are well informed. So after months and months of meetings, we made a corrective action document to guide teachers, and we also made an online form that teachers have to fill out, in which they document and they detail every intervention they've taken, every evidence-based practice they use, and after they go through this document, if it still shows that the kid needs E&L services or ELL services, then we move forward to identify the kid through the special education process. So we want to make sure we have a clear distinction on whether it's a language acquisition issue, as far as the child is not able to learn the language because they're new to the country, or is it a special education issue as far as the kid has a significant learning disability in either language that affects them from learning. But I think there's certain practices we could use to apply that to our non-E&L kids to make sure, is it a RTI issue, as far as do they need, Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 interventions, or do they have a significant learning disability that requires specialized educational support?
And that's really the key to the whole RTI MTSS plan, is really weeding that out. They're part of 5A also talks about looking at our suspension data and our SEL. So we have PBIS, we have FBAs, functional behavior assessments. I'm trying not to speak in jargon. I saw your face. Behavior intervention plans. We are proposing in our budget to increase our behavioral consultant that works at Hillside to spend a day, 2 half days in the middle school, high school, if to help support that. The middle school does a lot of things, mindful moments, and they're working on Ruler, and Hillside is implementing Second Step. So we've got a lot of great stuff happening in terms of the SEL, and I think, the development of the, yes.
You sort of touched on that just now.
I'm not trying to rush you, but if we're at a point where we could wrap up, if there's something, though, that you think needs to that hasn't been covered, that needs to be covered, let's bring it out, and if not.
I think
A lot of this really, 5D, is all about RTI. It's how do we build a plan in terms of supporting our children so that they have opportunities in the general education classroom, and that when we're classifying our students, we're really classifying students that are disabled, that just not have had enough time. I do want, if I could have 1 second, to talk about the mental health piece. I wanted to share something, and this kind of goes back to an increase in a proposal in our budget, an increase of mental health services. But I want to just share something because I think it's so enlightening. In 25 days in the health office, 1,851 students visited. And this is
1,821?
51 students visited the middle school and high school health office. This is not Hillside. This is data only from the middle school and high school. This is in 25 school days. We had 1,851 students visit. 1,281 of those students were really there just for medical reasons only. 496 of those students were there for medical reasons. However, the source could have been due to an anxiety, mental health issue in nature. These are students who are frequent visitors. They involve a great deal of time and require many conversations with parents and support staff. In addition, these students may have social situations which contribute to the time spent in the health office, such as lack of sleep and/or poor nutrition. 74 students during that 25-day period were in the health office that had a mental health diagnosis. Some of the frequent reasons that they were seeing, were panic attacks, anxiety, depression, ADHD, school avoidance, OCD, and suicidal thoughts. The health office works closely with the guidance department, social workers, and psychologists to help meet the needs of these students in crisis. Many of our students have a mental health diagnosis and are being maintained on psychotropic medications and various therapies. I just really wanted to end this as a powerful statement into words that, again, Hastings is not excluded from the mental health crisis that is happening throughout the nation.
Laura, thank you so much for sharing those numbers, and those numbers on their own they're a wake-up call. I was just going to ask, do you have any sense of whether those numbers are greater than they've been in past years? Again, I'm not saying that these numbers alone are not loud enough. I'm just interested.
I would say that in the short time that I have been, and I would probably ask Lou and Melissa to speak to this more, but in the short time that I've been, I was up in Hillside for so many years. So not that we were exempt from it, but it was different. In the short time that I've been here, in the 2 years, I've seen personally an increase in terms of hospitalizations, not even being able to find beds in Westchester hospitals because there is not enough room. So I don't know if that's what it was like 2 years ago. Melissa seems to be shaking her head that there has been an increase just from sitting in on the SST meetings in the high school. I mean, we are talking about serious mental health, suicide, not cutting classes, cutting oneself. So,
to jump in.
Go ahead. And add the middle school to it.
I was just going to jump in and say, the last 2 years we've seen an increase both at the middle school and the high school. We've always been able to handle each building sort of separately. But over the last 2 years, we've been covering each other because a building could have so many kids in crisis at one particular time. So we have to call on resources from another building and share staff because those days have gotten so heavy. We're seeing a lot of that more and more. This year was the first time we've ever sent kids to Bellevue because there have been no beds in Westchester County. And for Connecticut, Silver Hills, or Silver something, it's an absolutely increase.
Okay.
More kids are in crisis. And I mean, really the acute crisis by the time they get to us. So, to answer that question.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you.
Yeah, we just want to say,
Thank you.
on a positive note, working on this, it's been a good process working with the teachers, the school community, the families, we're working hand in hand. We have these discussions. We see generally what the community needs, and we're trying our best to make it applicable to them, whether it's an ICT class in high school, a resource room for the younger grades, where we're trying our best to make things Hastings friendly for all the kids that need it as much as possible. So things are a process, and we're working in the right direction, and we're hoping to bring everything we promised or we hope to bring as much as we can to the community.
Listen, on behalf of the board, thank you both so much. Tessa, you came in new, you hit the ground running. Laura, I know you're still relatively new at this, so thank you both so much for all the work you've been doing for this presentation tonight. We know your work's not done because there'll be questions coming in, but it's obviously a ton of effort that's been going in, and we very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to say it's very impressive to hear all of the many different spokes of this, and it's exciting and sort of makes me wish we had about double our budget, that we could, I mean, we will, but support this, but
Thank you.
there's just so much to be done.
Can I just add that this is parent hat on. The meetings that you held, the continuum of services, I thought it was great. And I thought it was really good to sit in a room with other parents, not just to express my own concerns, but to hear what other people's concerns were, and then to hear everybody sort of brainstorm possibilities. And that was really great. I think it's a testament to both of you, so thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to switch gears and move into our budget talk, and I don't know if everybody in our public audience wants to stay. If you want to go, feel free. So why don't we just take, 2 minutes. 2 minutes, like a real 2 minutes, not a Hastings 2 minutes, okay?
Sticking around, this is exciting. And thank you again to Laura and to TESFA for the information they provided us, and thank you to our entire administrative team who are here with us tonight, not only to answer questions related to special education, but I think I can tell you, having the honor and privilege to work with this team every day, this is a team effort, and while Laura and TESFA were speaking very specifically about things that fall under the umbrella of special education, we know that that means all of our kids in all of our schools. And so it is not a silo in and of itself. It is not this separate entity that exists independent of our schools. And so I thank our building leaders for actively engaging with Laura and TESFA to ensure that all our kids get what they need, regardless of what building they're in and regardless of what their needs are. So thank you for that. And to our community and for anyone who's going to watch, so all the information you heard shared from Laura and TESFA hopefully will provide you background on what's going on, and then would allow you to generate any questions, comments, or feedback for us that would be helpful to inform the rest of the public. So almost generating like an FAQ so that we can get that information back out to the public. You'll be able to submit questions and feedback in 2 ways, either through an email or through a Google survey, which will just have 2 questions, 2 boxes, one for special education and one for the budget. So I'm going to switch it over to talking about the budget, and we're going to, Maureen can frame it for us a little bit, but just so the community knows what we're looking at, the board is looking at, we do not have enough copies to pass around. But we're going to talk about what it is, and then we'll figure out what we could share.
The public doesn't have a copy.
I think the idea was to kind of use it as a talking point for us to see.
Okay.
So, but the one sheet that would be relevant to everyone is just the overview of the budget, right? And it speaks to how much the budget was last year, so the budget to budget change potentially, property tax change, and tax rate. So that stuff is there, and that will be public information. But the purpose of tonight's conversation for the board is to think through and discuss some of the items that are on there, think about where we want to land with our budget, but recognize that this is just one conversation. We still will have meetings on February 26th. We'll still have meetings on March 5th, on March 19th. The budget will iterate potentially several times between now and then. It's not that we're having a discussion tonight and we're done. It'll be something that will evolve. So that's why this.
And I think just because of the availability of the public, why don't I put this copy there so
Sure,
that it is available if anybody wants to look at it?
I can put it there. I don't need it. I haven't committed to mine. But
We're not-
just fair warning that this is.
I have an extra because people
This
didn't
is-
come tonight.
Direct one.
Here,
So
give this. I even
Don't
think
put
I
it on
have an
video.
extra.
No 107 because we'll delete and make sure it doesn't. No, only because it very likely could change between now and February 26th. And it has changed about 12 times in the
It
last
actually
week.
changed
Yeah,
today
so-
from our meeting this morning till the meeting tonight.
And it's nothing that it's not shady, we're not hiding anything, but we don't want anyone to think that whatever's on there is in cement, because it's not. It could change, so feel free to pass it around.
And also in terms of timing, the budget, the board will vote on what we're considering a final version of the budget. We don't take that vote until mid-March. And then we have the next month where we really educate the public about
I think it's
that.
actually April
April.
17th.
Yeah, it's
April
April
17th.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, April
mid-April, I'm
17th,
sorry.
yeah.
And then in May, we have the vote. So anyway, I'm just making the point that everything
Yes.
is still somewhat
Right.
fluid until that vote.
Because we don't have all our
happens.
information. I mean, I think we have a lot of the information that we needed. As the board knows, we've been meeting together through this process just to kind of go through some budget priorities as we've been working with the administrators at each building level. And then as we got information in terms of what our tax cap limit would be this year and what we would be able to spend under that plan, and having our assessments and all the information that helps us, you know, kind of see where we will be for the next year's budget. So where we stand right now in terms of the tax cap, that's some information that we do have. Our limit to spend next year, because of assessment growth in the town, we could technically levy property tax change of about 6%. Right now, we're at a 5.13% tax levy change, which translates to a 0.5% increase in people's taxes. It would be less than 1%. We're at a 0.54%. And what I tried to put in front of you tonight with some of the proposals. So we know that our budget right now reflects everything that we currently have in this year's budget, and that would roll over. And in addition, at each level, I mean, we can go through some of those.
Yeah,
Do you think
sure.
it's good to highlight that? And then if you had any questions for any of the administrators about any of these additional or new programs, then they can speak to that.
And just to clarify for the board, because not everyone has been in finance committee meetings, the tax cap is still 2%, right? But because we have a growth factor that is higher than a lot of other places, we have a little more room to grow our budget to maintain what we have. I don't mean grow necessarily to exponentially add to it, but to sustain what we have and potentially enhance what is in place.
Right.
So just have that as a reference point, and our community will learn more about that in the coming weeks as we talk about the different aspects of the budget.
And the key piece on that is we can grow the budget without increasing our taxes
Right.
overwhelmingly.
Right. So we're fortunate, and that growth factor, just for everyone to keep in mind, that does not happen every year. So you may not have that opportunity. Typically, I mean, even a few years back, we were only able to increase our levy about 1.4% or something like that. Last year, we had a little bit of growth factor. Part of the growth factor is because the assessment of the town, which includes some new properties that came online, that are generating additional tax dollars. So there was an individual who had purchased a home in Hastings, and that particular home is generating additional tax revenue that is in addition to like what had existed. So, we're benefiting from that, and it comes at a good time because there were some needs, like Laura had mentioned before, in terms of our clinical staff and increase in psychologists that we're able to propose in this budget that had we not had that growth factor may not have been possible.
Can I just ask you,
Sure.
Do we know what goes in that growth factor? Do we know it's that property? Do we know?
I know that definitely a portion of it is. I think I have multiple times reached out to the town, as I did last year in the growth factor. It has been certified by the state. I know, in fact, it's been a process, like we have been getting some parts of that property the last 3 years.
Is that over? Like, have they gotten?
Yes, I believe it is. I believe it is completely online at this point, but it does make, from my understanding, I think the property does pay close to $1 million in tax, something like close to that a year in taxes. So it is, and then also with the reassessment, we also have people who may be paying more taxes. But I mean, there is absolutely new dollars from that, not the entire growth.
This is not increased assessed value as a function of the change in individual, like the overall.
Well, part of it is. Yeah, part of it is, and some of it is new value, and that would be part of it, would be his property. But again, I have asked the town of Greenberg multiple times for the breakdown, but I think because it's a mixed number for them, they haven't said. But I do know that, in fact, we knew when this property was coming on that we would get, in fact, more additional dollars.
Just as a question, what happens if there's a reduction in assessed values?
So I looked at it today, so as an example, the assessed valuation that I received in November did go down slightly to the number, but the number here is reflecting some of that decrease. So they still, I think I had sent to the board not too long ago, there are still some residential cases being negotiated at the town. But as an example, I just plugged in today, if in fact between now and the end of the year, if let's just say $5 million of assessed value was challenged and agreed to, so if our assessment were to drop $5 million from this number, that would put the tax rate in about 1%.
Okay.
So we still have, like, even if that were to happen, which I do anticipate there will be some drop in that assessment. I'm hoping not a significant drop according to the town, like the amount of properties they indicated that were being negotiated down. I don't think, it could be $10,000 for some. I don't think, I think 5 million, even using 5 million as a high number for a drop in assessment, that would still only increase with this current budget, our tax rate to 1%. But I think that's good to keep in mind because you may want to, if the board had a particular tax rate in mind that they were comfortable, that would allow for that change if there was a drop in the assessed value to stay at that 1% mark. I just want to, before we go into the details of what's included, if that assessment were not to change and you wanted to levy up to the tax cap limit, like we have some other items that we have not included, but if there were some contingency or additional items that needed to be added, right now we're approximately $400,000 below the tax cap limit.
That's the .54, puts us at the 5.13.
1.5, it would put us at 1.54 tax rate. Change.
I'm sorry.
If I added if we were to just, if the board felt it was in our best interest to go to the max tax levy, the resulting tax rate with the information we have today, with the assessment we have today, would mean for individual taxpayers, their tax rate increase would be 1.54%.
Would be the tax cap.
Yes, well, for the, tax rate, the levy increase would actually be
that would be the
6%. It would be a 6% levy increase.
Okay, so, but without adding those additional, right now, we're looking at 0.54?
Yes.
Okay, so it
Yep.
adds 1 point up.
That's where we are right now.
Okay.
With everything that's listed,
Okay.
right? Yeah.
So we can just, so we can just go through what's
Sure.
included in that
And
thus
just so
far.
everyone is clear, this part of it has also iterated based on different conversations that we've had over the last month. Those of you who were finance about, 6 weeks ago know that we were having a different conversation because we were looking at different numbers. We got state aid number changed a little bit. We found out that we got somebody, here, a student that might have been going out for, tuition, we're not having to pay tuition, they're here. Things like that change, and that affected what we were looking at.
Right.
And it also affected the conversations about proposals with our building leadership team, which, as they've had time, they've also looked at things. So, for example, middle school worked on a mock schedule for next year very early, which we are greatly appreciative of. But it allowed them to see, okay, we might be able to do this. I mean, it's very much like a jigsaw puzzle that looks a certain way today, may not look the same way in 3 months, but from those projections, we made adjustments. Same with the high school. Elementary, we're looking at numbers of kids, right? And so right now, as you'll see on the list here, we're projecting 5 incoming kindergartens, just based on enrollment and based on sort of what we're hearing about data. Doesn't mean that we won't have 6 classes, and it doesn't mean that we don't need to prepare to have 6 classes, but right now we are budgeting for 5, as an example, right? And those things have been somewhat fluid over the last 6 weeks, and so where we stand today is probably more solidified than what we've been, but it's not formalized in any way. It's not concretized in any way. We will move forward. So,
Can I ask a question about that? So when you say anticipating possibly 5 more students, is that based upon the kindergarten screening that was done, or just like in general, we can expect?
Well, we look at our numbers over the past few years, and then we look at data in the county as well, and so you just kind of make projections off of that. But we are starting kindergarten registration next week, so depending on how that goes, and suddenly, let's say we get 100 kids registered next week, that's a significant number. That would lead us to believe then we are going to have 6 sections.
Right, we always start with 5. We've always traditionally started with 5, and based upon the initial kindergarten registration process, we look at where we were comparatively to years past, and if we've had like 80 at that mark, then typically we're at 5. When we've had like 90, then typically we find that we go to 6 sections, just the
So
way
then
things
next week, we'll have
turn
a
over.
different conversation potentially.
Right, okay.
Makes this fun.
So that's why I think it's important that we do have room under the cap right now, because that's something that we may need to consider, and as well as some of the other items that are not, there's a possibility that some of them, they're kind of in priority, so the top have been rolled in. the middle section are things that are stronger possibilities than some of the items on the bottom,
And so,
based upon what we've learned.
And all of this is dictated by the conversations we've had with our building level teams, right? So we've met with and our directors, and looking at their needs as they're projecting them today. Again, it could change. So what are some of the things that we're looking at in terms of potential add-ons to what exists now? So not looking at some professional development and stuff like that. That's potentially a 1-year thing or a 2-year thing. So that doesn't necessarily compound our costs, right? But when you add staff, that compounds our costs because we have to pay them more the next year. We have to pay their health insurance and their retirement. So looking at staffing, some of the additions that are, I think, significant that we should put on the table and everyone to be aware of. We're looking at increasing our guidance counselor at the elementary school. So we have someone there who is now a .2. Who is stipend through some Schedule B positions that allows her to be there a little more, but we are suggesting an increase in that staffing for next year for various reasons. Another thing that we're looking at is a math instructional coach, and something that we're looking at targeting our middle school, potentially with a link at the upper elementary grades as well to ensure some, continuity. So that position has been built into the budget for next year. Another thing that we looked at based on conversations we've had in the last few weeks is whether or not we need to add the option for resource room at Hillside. And so we have built in the position, but we are not 100% certain today if we would need the position based on annual reviews, based on conversations with teachers and with the special education team. But we do feel like there's potential that that position would be necessary at Hillside.
Yes.
It is on here. It is Hillside. Sorry. So that's that. Another thing adding on is, which is significant and links to what Laura shared at the end of her, Laura and Tespa shared at the end of their presentation, is adding mental health staff. So we talked about the counselor at Hillside, but in addition to that, we're also looking at increasing a district psychologist and an additional psychologist, of 1.0. And so that would bring us up to having 6 psychologists in the district?
Yes, a total of 6. 4 that are currently assigned to buildings, and then 2 that would be district-wide.
Right. And so that really came from this conversation about mental health and how do we service our children, how do we provide service for our children. Not only our classified children who have mandated services, but also our children who are showing up at the nurse's office, who may need an intervention, may need some support for a temporary amount of time. And we want to make sure we have access to the mental health staff to provide that. We also want to make sure that our CPSE meetings or CSE and CPSE meetings are running effectively and overseeing 504s as well.
I just want to say that first of all, the mental health, please, I know we spoke about it, but this is kind of, this is not special ed. This is really a K-12.
Right.
I don't want anyone to think that this is a special education on mental health. This is a K-12 mental health piece. And the other thing is that by adding that additional psychologist, we're taking responsibilities off of our current psychologists, such as running those meetings. So, as Lou had said, we were having to borrow from other schools. This will now they'll have more time to really focus on the crisis and the mental health of all of our students. All students.
Okay. So those are, there are other items, as you see, that are listed there. Those are some of the staffing changes, right? And so those are things that we would be mindful of as a community as we look out a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and what the financial impact of that would be based on what the needs are. And one of the complex things about special education is that as children go through their journey over the course of a year, when you get ready for an annual review meeting, their needs may change. And so the services they will require may change. And so whether they're in an ICT class versus whether they go to resource room, whether they're in a special class, that can fluctuate from year to year. So we need to be able to meet those needs and revise program based on those needs. That's just one example because that is very much student-driven. So those are some of the bigger items that we have integrated into the budget proposal. You'll see kind of in the middle of the page some other items that are not in the proposal, but very well could need to be in the proposal.
Tony, I would just,
Go, please. I'm
you
sorry.
also have at the middle school the person who would
I
be doing
didn't have
RTI coordinator, as well as they would be AI. There was a need for additional
AIS.
AIS staff, but
And AOK.
And AOK, but
Right.
then there'd also be a .2 RTI coordinator within that full-time position,
Right.
as well as an increase in PE staffing at the high school to address some very large class sizes they have in PE. So again, that Lou, again, it was,
Yeah.
and I felt bad because Lou had, been out ill, and we hadn't had a chance,
Right,
like we
haven't-
had with the other administrators. We've kind of been able to check it and go back over the budget as we got better numbers and just look at the proposals and then work it back in. So that one, there were some today that different things that maybe the last time we met you hadn't seen up on the included that are now rolled into the budget.
Yeah, but I was going to say, that's a good one looking ahead. And I only say that because that was an issue like 4 years ago. And I think it was when our kids were there. And do you remember there was like 100-person gym
Right,
class,
right.
and it was awful.
Right.
And it was so I
They
think
they probably loved it, but.
But no, I like that we're looking ahead
Right,
to try to
right,
prevent that, because I
right.
remember, I think that was probably the subject of about 3 high school
Right.
PTA meetings, the size of that gym class. so.
Right, so we were able to, again, after working, we've been able to get all of the proposals up on the top there. I just didn't want to miss any of the staffing ones.
Sorry,
And like
yes.
Tony had, also the one with the psychologist, I think Laura had mentioned before, by doing that, the speech person, because she
Right.
did, who is currently chairing meetings, will be able to provide more speech
That's right.
services with that hire as well.
So it would allow us to distribute our staffing in a way that would best meet our kids' needs. And that's really where a lot of this, not all of it came from, is looking at our student needs and our different building leaders and directors thinking about ways to address those needs. Some creatively with what we have existing, and then some with what if we added this and what would it look like? So those conversations have been quite rich over the last.
What's the POC National Convention?
A person of color convention that we had a couple of people go to this year and came back with really positive feedback. So we'd like to be able to send a team, earmark some money there to send a couple of people to that conference.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask,
It's
I
the
see,
last one in the first batch.
PD. Sorry.
under the bottom, we have AIS Math at Hillside 1.0, and then also Hillside Resource Room 1.0. Can you just, those would be 2 separate people? I know that we don't know that
Well-
we're necessarily budgeting for both, but I guess what's the difference between the 2?
Well, they would be theoretically different people, because if we were adding resource room, the primary reason you would add resource room is for special education purposes, right? For IEP-driven services. An AIS math teacher would be to provide math support for kids who are not classified theoretically. Gen ed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a person that does both, depending on what's going on, right? So that's why it's parceled out separately, but depending on what the needs are, as the teachers and the administrative team go through their CSE reviews, it will shape what that looks like. Okay? So.
And I also saw under the proposal, I know Laura had spoken about the ICT classes in chemistry, in geometry. So I see geometry, we haven't built that one in yet.
It's algebra.
Wait, I see geometry in here?
There
This
is
is
that-
what I'm looking at under the
Oh,
the
that
last
was
category.
for
Well, that's
students who are gifted, and that would be like 7th grade or 8th graders
Yes.
Oh,
taking
I'm so-
geometry
Oh,
on the
so wait,
bottom.
So when Laura talked about the ICT
They-
Chem
she
and
had that within
geometry-
her current
That's built in.
staffing.
That's already happening?
Yeah.
Oh, so this is different?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Never
But,
mind.
but one
I'll be
Yeah.
like, what's her name, Emily Latello?
No,
Never
but
mind.
that ICT middle school algebra is something
that's
different
middle
than what they were
school.
speaking about at the high school. I think that was a separate line item.
and again, just to show you how fluid the conversation
Sorry,
is.
geometry oh, I see, that's for the
They're
kids who double accelerate.
Right,
Correct.
exactly.
So
it's a
right now, they're
different-
going up to the high school,
I
so
see.
if,
Okay.
if like the geometry numbers, then it impacts them at the high school. So there was,
okay.
again, that was something that is something that's out there, like things are still fluid,
I
that's why
see
they're
it.
on the list. But
So
I
it's
think
not
based
ICT,
upon
I understand.
conversations, it was on the,
But if you go into the proposal
yet.
section and you look kind of in the middle of the proposal area, you'll see ICT middle school algebra. That's in the proposal area. That's something that came out of a conversation today. Literally, we're meeting about something else, and suddenly, oh, wait, 8th graders taking algebra. Do any of them need ICT support? And that became a discussion. So we added that today it was not on there because we hadn't had that conversation. And so that is something we're looking at. We're not 100% certain that we need it at this point, but it is something that we're looking at.
Right, so you're right, because some of the things in the middle, to me, are more, there's a likelihood some of those could end up being rolled into the budget by the time you see it at the end of February, but people, I think at this, like, as they go along, they need to, like the kindergarten, the additional, those three all are related to kindergarten, because if you bump a section at kindergarten, then you need another aide, but then you may need an increase in specials, because then you'll have six sections in 4 of the levels, which may then require us to increase like PE, math, and art at Hillside. So that's why there's that other.
Another thing that recently came up again, weeks ago, we had conversations. This wasn't even a conversation point, but we have had difficulty getting an athletic trainer. Is that what you call it? Athletic trainer? Yes, okay. An athletic trainer has been, they help us take care of our kids when they get hurt during sports. And so we have contracted with Columbia, and typically they provide someone for a few weeks. We haven't been able, they have not been able to provide us someone. That may have almost a significant, well, not, I mean, double the amount that we're necessarily allocated. So we have allocated about 40,000. Columbia said, well, if you make it 70, we'll probably be able to find you someone, that kind of thing.
And that would still be actually not a terrible price, I mean, for what we're getting, but, you know, because they're here. I mean, I guess on the per hour, if you were to annualize it, in fairness, it's not completely.
But as an example of something, again, about 6 weeks ago was not something we talked about.
Right.
We had to talk about it because we need to fill that position. It's about our kids' health and safety. And so that is something we need to be mindful of as we plan for next year. So those are some of the things that you see on there. Another thing that might be important to point out there is, as Maureen touched upon, in the proposal area, the additional kindergarten section. So right now it's sitting in the proposal area because we don't know how many incoming kindergartners we have. We sit here 2 weeks from now, we know that we have 100 kids registered, we're going to have a different conversation, right? And so we would recommend at that point that probably would need to be rolled in because we're anticipating 6 sections. So the proposal area is probably the most fluid on that list at this point. At the bottom of the proposal area is, I would argue, probably more long-term stuff that we'd like to see built in down the road. One of the things that's on there is the Hillside back playground, which is quite old, and I don't know if that's, you can say that, but it's something that's well used. It is.
We were trying to actually get the exact date today because we did speak about putting a potential grant application into the Ed Foundation, but I will say, and I don't want to speak for them exactly, but they are helping right now refurbish our stage at Hillside, and they have quite a bit of money allocated toward that. So they said that you could put it, but that may not happen in a year or two, depending on how much money the stage ends up. But we will put it in just to see. But again, just things to keep your eye on, because I'm not saying it's in dire need, but it is, I think, over 20 years old or something like that.
Well, playground equipment is like notoriously expensive.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
That's all the information.
I'm not overly concerned, but that is something that was,
I guess one of my questions is on the top in terms of proposals.
Yep.
It says RTI coordinator, AIS staff, AOK staff for a full-time position. And then it also has Jim Wright. Why can't...
I'm sorry, it also has...
It also has training with Jim Wright. So Jim Wright is going to be doing RTI. So if Jim Wright has been here for 2 years, I guess my question is, like, why... If it feels, I don't know, from the outside, it feels kind of redundant.
It really isn't. It is a matter of supporting the training that has been going on, and as I mentioned earlier, really articulating more clearly what it looks like K-12, because it did start in one spot last year. It has been built into this year, and so based on the plan as we looked at it, adding some more PD next year, and if this person as an RTI coordinator is able to oversee that, that's just the middle school.
So the RTI coordinator is just for the middle school?
That's what that is proposed for, yes.
it's a .2 of that position.
It's not a district-wide position.
It's not a district-wide position.
But,
And is there an RTI coordinator, I'm sorry, is there an RTI coordinator in the high school and the middle school?
there is not an RTI, I don't think so. I mean, the building level, right, RTI, you guys,
so
right.
I guess it begs the question, why would we have an RTI coordinator for just one school? Shouldn't it be overall?
Well, that's going to also be part of the job of the Director of Learning and Instruction. because it is a multi-tiered system of support, right?
So if it's the part, I'm sorry, it's, then I got to go back. If it's going to be the part, if it's going to be the job of the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Administration, well then, why would you need an RTI coordinator at the middle school?
I mean, I can let our middle school team speak on it, sure, to give you more detailed response. You can come on up together, please. Only so we can hear you, not because, yeah, if you don't mind coming up. Oh.
Well, it's being recorded though,
Yeah,
so.
if you, come on down. You're the next contestant. It's like Plinko.
Hi.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Chris.
So Chris has been spearheading the RTI program and the structure of it, so I'm going to let him speak to it.
Okay.
But I will say that there is an enormous amount of data collected and analyzed. So, better? So Chris has been spearheading our review of RTI in the past. How's this?
Yes, yeah.
All right, so.
Wait, you can pull it closer to you. So you don't
You
have to
can rock
lean
out,
over.
right?
You can just.
So, can you hear me now?
Request.
Yeah, I'm gonna just.
Fly equals fly.
I don't want to repeat. So, the RTI, in the past, we've had academic intervention services. So, because we're reviewing the audit and there is serious emphasis on MTSS and the RTI process, we have been looking at that very seriously. And the more we look at it, and again, I'll let Chris speak to this, the more we recognize that this is huge in order to do it well. So I'm going to let you share what we've been doing.
Right,
And you'll understand why we need a coordinator.
from a lot of the work that we've been doing, there are a lot of pieces to a good MTSS program. It includes looking at different pieces of data. The tiers have different components to it. So a lot of the work we've been doing, a lot of the forms we've been creating and structures we've been creating need someone to kind of like pull it all together. And that's why we found we felt that the coordinator would be a good person to kind of pull all those pieces together. MTSS has a behavioral arm, an academic arm, and within those academic arms there's 3 different tiers. So again, it was kind of a way of making it a comprehensive look at the data.
How are you handling it now?
We're all taking pieces of it on, and it really is huge. We've had several teachers. We've covered sometimes their classes where they've gone in and they've assessed kids, and then they've pulled them out and decided which tier service they've needed. But we really have not had an RTI program. So the middle school, and middle schools were never required to do RTI. It was always academic intervention services. So this is really a step back from what we've had, putting in a real formalized program. And I think, we haven't discussed this, but I think the RTI coordinator in the middle school is the beginning. And I think to see how it works, because there are so many pieces to it, it's conceivable that the elementary school, and I don't know about the high school, but the elementary school, this may branch into the elementary school and be able to help them out as well. But there needs to be a point person, someone maintaining the data, somebody analyzing it, somebody working with the teachers to understand why kids are coming in, what the different tiers are going to look like, and what the interventions are going to be. Somebody maintaining a resource, an online resource, so teachers can go into that toolkit and identify different strategies that they can use. So it's huge.
And just to piggyback on Gail's point, depending on how it evolves and depending on how thoroughly we can implement a systemic approach to RTI, that need may evolve into something else, and it may look different 2 years from now. And RTI is incredibly complex, as I'm sure you know, Christina, from your work in school. For any district I've ever worked with and every district I've ever spoken to, it is incredibly challenging. And things fall through the cracks all the time, unfortunately, even in the best case scenario with 8,000 people overseeing it. And so to really kind of target this and potentially grow it would be wonderful, or target it, put the stuff in place that we need, and then that position may, like I said, evolve into something different, down the road.
And we see that person. Yeah.
Please.
We see that person actually also going into classes and working with teachers, because tier 1 is interventions happening in the classroom. And And our teachers really don't necessarily have all the strategies and don't necessarily have the expertise to understand the kinds of differentiation that needs to go on before it even becomes a tier 2 intervention.
And you know, I'll just add, Tony, you and I were just talking about RTI because it is mandated, but you and I had both read literature that it was actually, it was hurting because it wasn't being done the right way. Right. And then, you know, we were discussing and you were saying that when it's properly done, then it's good. So I don't mind bringing in somebody else. And I'll also add, I think it will also, you know, with our new position, with our new director of learning, this will help support that person. And one of my concerns about that position has always been, is there support for that person? So if we bring in, you know, part-time RTI, and I have to say, I am thrilled to see the math coach for the middle school in this because it's been a long time, you know, and I know that Farragut has been trying really to you know, I don't want to use the word improve because that suggests it's not good, but to really take it to new heights. And I think that this does it. I think this person can hit the ground running, maybe start even with differentiating some lesson plans even before the director has come up with what his or her vision is. But if we can support that position through an RTI, through a coach, that's a great start for this new person. And again, for math in our middle school, I'll just add this piece because this is what I've always said. I think we do have a group of kids who in their younger times, in 6th and 7th, could really accelerate further, but we haven't had the appropriate venue, so we've been looking towards other things that are, they can work, but we can do it, we can really make that work, and this will allow for that sort of level of differentiation in 6th grade, in 7th grade, and 8th grade, so I'm really happy. So
I also think this probably exemplifies the point that we do need to have a very thoughtful and intentional conversation around professional development in our district, and that's not something, at least as far as I know, that we've articulated and codified in any way. And so your question earlier, Christina, about PD for the general ed teachers who are working with all our kids because there are special ed children in every classroom, but this Gail just touched on this notion of differentiation, tiered instruction. That's about finesse. That's about a toolbox. That's about, not literally, but figuratively. Those are two huge focal points for professional development. We've also dedicated ourselves to professional learning around diversity, around bias, around racism, and how we are integrating those learning experiences into our faculty meetings, into our classroom learning experiences. That's a huge bucket, right? And those are just 3. And we could probably list about integrating, instructional technology came up from our teachers. They were looking for more PD in that area. So these are things that are kind of, dots all over. How do we connect them all, right? And so, and RTI, because it speaks to general education, and in coordinating with the director of learning, in essence, could also inform that. And so while it's really focused on specific kids, it could inform that work. And so, we're excited about the possibility. Also recognizing that it's point 2. It's not like it's some full-time position because the person, could be needed. It could be pulled, in so many different directions. And that's something that we've talked about even with Gail and Chris. The puzzle looks a certain way today in terms of the schedule. It may look different in May. It may look different in July. And so we're going to have to accommodate for that. So when we hire for this position, and when the budget is adopted and approved, if we are able to hire for this position, we're looking for a superstar who has probably special ed certification and some general ed certification in literacy, right? So we have a vision for what we see in the person, not the personality, we would find that as well, but what we're looking for credentially speaking.
So Maureen, do we have enough money in the budget for PD?
Thank you.
No, we have, we do have, that's one thing, Tony, as we go through and when we're preparing for the upcoming budget meetings, we have money in there. We'll have to identify, because there's always a certain dollar amount in PD that is earmarked, and then there's some that is there knowing that there will be things that'll come up. This year when we had...
and I think being able to articulate a professional development plan, Jody, that speaks to a timeline around PD so they don't become one-day learning events that are then we move on to the next one, but are really sustained and are deep-rooted, and I think are global enough that pedagogically, it doesn't matter if you're teaching kindergarten or if you're teaching 6th grade or if you're teaching 12th grade. But these are skills that we want all our teachers to, and not that they don't have them, but to continue to enhance that skill set. So,
Is the year-over-year PD dollars spent, do you see that going up, or is it just redistributed, or?
Well, we have, I think, enough. We just, like I said, as we're going through some of the things he had mentioned, that we can make sure that we have enough, just as we work together.
But I'm
with
looking
people,
at more
I don't think it'll go up.
ongoing,
Yeah.
as a strategy, as a philosophy.
Right.
I don't think it'll go up necessarily. I think it's just a matter of, and not because we're working within some sort of confines. I think when you're strategic about PD, it really, it should be small and focused, not, while giving people choice, right, and voice in some of that learning. But we haven't really even had a chance to start talking about these things yet. But as a leadership team, we started talking about vision, and we started thinking about what that looks like for where we want to go. And these themes have come up in those conversations. So now it's kind of articulating it. But I don't think it's a matter of increasing money. It's also a matter of capitalizing on the expertise that we'll have internally. I'm hoping that we find a director of learning that can do PD. I'm hoping that a math coach that we hire will be able to do PD. This RTI coordinator might be able to do a little bit of PD. And that doesn't even touch upon the expertise that does exist in our school community already. Not that we're going to force PD on our teachers, but people that do have an interest in sharing their knowledge. So it's an exciting place to actually start this journey, because professional learning is an opportunity for us to model for our kids that we're continuously growing, that we're continuously enhancing our skill set, and that we see ourselves as learners first. So I'm excited about that work moving forward.
That PD with teachers that have been leading classes on different expertise.
After school. Yes,
started it.
Yeah, we did that this year, thanks to our leadership team. Please,
And
microphone.
I'm just going to give us a soft 10-minute warning.
Okay.
Oh, I like it.
Just clarify, so before we were talking about the RTA coordinator, I think you mentioned 0.2, and I might be getting confused, and then I looked at this and it says 1.0. So I'm wondering, is the RTI coordinator 0.2 and then AIS staff? So whoever's hired is also going to be in the classroom and teaching an AIS class?
It's the position that we need. We may be moving people on our staff around. So we need a 0.6 AIS, we need a 0.2 RTI coordinator, we need a 0.2 earth science support teacher. Those are the pieces that we need. But
who it is will be.
This person that we bring in will be the RTI coordinator most probably, but there may be somebody internally that wants to take these positions, and then we'll have to fill those positions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a quick
Please
one.
go.
Unrelated to a lot of this. Maureen, is this?
Should we go?
At the bottom?
Yeah, you don't have to sit there anymore.
For facilities.
You're not you
with
can't leave totally.
100,000.
Right.
Is that really having?
No, Jody, wait, do you mind repeating it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the money that's allotted here for facilities, for additional building work, given some of what we've been talking about in Facilities Committee. Is that really enough money?
Well, there's two things. I think, again, a lot of these are anything people give to us in terms of proposals, right? So all of these come from building levels, and then they're folded in, right? And then as we keep meeting with them, they kind of shift around and move into different buckets. I think that's a separate conversation, because I think we've started to realize that, my hope would be that the board would allow for the increase to the capital reserve this year, and then fund money there, which would not require us to have money allocated in our yearly budget for that work.
Maureen's suggestion to add to the capital reserve fund makes a lot of sense, just based on the fact that we have a building that's
and we also receive the aid when we do it that way, because it allows you to plan for the work, submit it, and then get back. Well, this year, as an example, it is 42.4, but as an example, the rate changes because there is an interest level on it, so sometimes it could even be closer to 47 cents on the dollar. So, I mean, again, 40 cents on the dollar getting back is significant on $1 million worth of work.
So being strategic about some of those reserve funds and how we allocate money there necessarily, moving down the road, would allow us to be prepared for whether it's a staffing need, whether it's a physical, I mean, capital reserve is a little different. And the great thing about a capital reserve fund, if I understand it, and Maureen has taught me a lot, is once we put money in that, the community gets to vote on how we use that money.
Yes.
So if we decide that we want to pull it out and, fix, I don't know, the boiler downstairs, I don't even know if that's a capital project, but if we could.
It would be, yes.
All right, okay, there you go. Then, if not if it just blows up.
But you can get
and
an
bite your tongue.
emergency and be able to
Right.
pass it through, but they're planned projects.
The community gets to vote on it, right? So just like you would vote on the budget on May 16th, one of the proposals would be, we're using the money for this. And so it holds us as a district to some level of accountability as a board, as a leadership team, and to be transparent about that, which we are. We will, but this is, an even more specific way to do that. So.
I have a question related to something else, unless anybody's
Anyone.
following. This is a pretty black and white question. The calculators that we have on here, is that for calculators for families who are struggling?
Yes,
or for
yes, that's
everybody?
it, that's
Okay.
it.
Yes.
So the original proposal was
support that.
50,000, so we put in 10, and again, it may be a little bit less than that, but I think in speaking.
But we're still asking families who can afford to.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And again, a conversation, to your point that we started talking about at a finance, I think we started this conversation at finance, and then today we were together and we asked Lou and Gail what would be the implications of that if we needed, and there was an agreement that if we had enough calculators for families who may not be able to afford them, would be fine, and our families could be asked to purchase.
And you always need some extra for the kids who forget them as well. Like, what I mean? So I think it's the combination of both.
We probably have to improve our inventory system a little bit, scan, barcode, whatever.
Right.
But we'll work on that as we go forward.
And I
But-
will say to parents, as you pay that money for the calculator, I will say that they have lasted my children a good 7-8 years, so they've lasted them through college.
But I would also say to that, once your kids leave here, if they don't need them in college, you could also
Oh
donate
my
them
gosh,
to
totally.
school.
I was just going to say that.
These are a new type
I
of
just found
calculator.
two. I
Yeah.
don't know if
that's
they're still.
it's
They are
newer.
relatively
Yeah,
new.
it's a newer. I think they're.
It does not apply.
Unfortunately, TI has improved their product, and of course the AP programs have gone on. So AP Calculus, AB, and BC are requiring these new breed calculators.
Dang.
And that's one of the reasons why the shift. In addition, there's also the requirement from the Algebra 2 regions,
Right.
geometry regions, and even the algebra regions to have a certain level of calculator. That's what the original proposal was, for the middle school and the high school. After we met today, we thought about the implications of cost, and we're going to go back to our old model of providing those for those who don't have the means to buy their own. But we do need to shift into the new style of calculator with the new functionality to sort of offer our coursework.
And Greg Stevens has been very mindful of that. I mean, he's not like spending money left and right. In fact, he rebudgeted to try to buy some of them this year so that we could, save some money next year.
Hopefully we'll be current
Right.
for a few years,
Right.
and then that method would work. As kids graduate, and they can
It can be their gift back.
pay them back.
Be nice to a senior. Outgoing. Be nice to a freshman.
I'm just looking at the clock
Sure.
right
Please.
now, so if
Any
there are
other
other important things that we need to get to or questions, feel free, but we'll look towards.
I mean, I guess I'd be interested just in a higher level philosophical conversation amongst us as a board. I mean, these high level numbers, do they feel good? Do they look good to everyone? One thing I will say that I really like about this budget is, everyone knows, I'm interested in strategic planning. We haven't had an opportunity to do that. But if I were to guess, so one of the things I think about is we're taking on a fair amount of costs that are going to keep going, right, with people. I don't know how this compares to years past as far as, what's that?
Big uptick.
It's a big uptick in people,
Yeah, 5
right?
Right. Well, I mean, this is one of the first times we've gotten this growth factor, so I think that's
Well,
part
this
of it.
is- Right, so you got the growth factor, but we won't get it, and
No,
it's
exactly.
an ongoing,
Yep.
right? So I think that we have to think about that when we think about voting for taking on a fair amount of cost that will go out into the future. So the filter that I'm trying to use in looking at that is, what of these things really connect to what I imagine will be some of the things on the strategic plan when we start doing it? I think, and so I'm encouraged because I think they do, and so I feel more comfortable passing, a 3.75% uptick in the budget, 0.5% or so raise in tax rate, because it's connecting to a lot of the curriculum and learning stuff that we've been talking about for a few years. Supporting special education and integrating that and making that a more inclusive, just strengthening that in a variety of different ways that Laura and Tessa just took us through. SEL, a variety of differentiated, learning topics here. So it doesn't feel one-offy, pet project, a whole bunch of, little things people thought would be really fun and nice to have, but it really feels strategic, and so I'm very encouraged by it. So I just wanted to share that high-level thought and just get other people's thoughts about where the numbers are vetting out. Do you feel good about them? Do you like them? I don't know. Any thoughts? Yeah, thumbs up.
I feel good. I feel that when I look, it looks like we're doing stuff that we've always wanted to do and hoped to do, but when you have a tax cap of 0.6%, there's not much you can do. And we've been really watchful and mindful, and we can credit our longer serving board members. They've kept taxes low, but we have an opportunity to keep taxes in that same range, but really add in more. Add in the special ed supports that wouldn't it have been nice if we always had, to add in specialists to help us look at our curriculum and differentiate it and make it better. To me, it's an opportunity to do our wish list. And I agree, not in a pet project way. This is really, and I have to say, and I like the RTI because to me that's that bridge between special ed and gen ed. That's what takes those silos away. So
And if I can just say a couple of things. One is I have to commend Maureen in her willingness to massage these numbers probably multiple times a day over the last couple of months, but also more broadly against the last several years of the work in the district, to be really fiscally responsible about what needed to happen and what did happen. So I thank you, Maureen, and has educated me tremendously. But as we look at some of these add-ons, to be very intentional about those add-ons, in some instances filling gaps that have existed potentially for years, and in some instances to start the work. It's kind of like we're in neutral, so now put it in drive and go, because we know that we need to go this direction. So I do think it has, much to the credit of our building leadership team, thought out and not just, okay, let's just add this. And I thank you for saying that, Doug and Lisa. And we're going to have to be revisiting this every year, right?
Yes.
We don't know where we sit a year from now financially. We don't know what this tax plan, at the federal level means for us here in Hastings. We don't know what our growth factor looks like next year. We don't know what our state aid looks like next year. So these are conversations that we're going to be revisiting. And what I also think is important to recognize, and again, a credit to Maureen for being able to put the picture on the table, but to our building leadership team for being able to say, all right, if we have to make cuts, how do we make cuts that don't impact kids? How do we make cuts that don't impact our educators? And there were some really creative conversations. I'm going to start renting out my parking spot. No, and I commend them for being partners in this work, because it's not easy. Those are not easy conversations to have. So where we sit a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, may be different. But I also think we'll have a much clearer understanding of what our priorities are, whether it's in a strategic plan, whether it's part of our PD plan, and I think that will allow us to make decisions that we can very easily hang on that vision, hang on that strategic plan, as opposed to trying to connect the dots. The dots will have been connected, and we'll know where our decisions lie and why they lie there. So I think that's really, really important. And our kids are so awesome. Like, our kids here are really, and I'm not because you're here. I mean, I don't even know who your kids are. But our kids are so bright and so engaged and so invested in this place, that to provide them opportunities that we can to enhance what already exists is really just, it's wonderful. And I can tell you that kids have informed these conversations directly and indirectly through not only the building level and even focus groups that I've engaged in. Our kids are aware of the mental health issues that exist. Our kids are aware of the split that happens with kids who can do it and kids who can't do it, and I mean that academically. and so I share that, well, that's where an ICT geometry and an ICT chemistry class comes in. Not to say that a kid sat there and said, we need an ICT class, although a kid did tell me that they needed an ICT class in geometry.
And our kids are precocious.
They are. And I was like, what's your name? Because you're going to get it. No, you win. No. It's great. It's like Oprah. You get an ICT class. No, but it is something that directly or indirectly they have informed. Like I said, the mental health issues that exist, and they're seeing them themselves. And how do we support our kids within the confines of a space that they feel very safe in? So to the board, thank you for giving us the space to play with this. It has not been an easy process because it just keeps changing. But I do think that I bring up our kids because that has always been where we bring the conversation back, right? Like, how is this going to help our kids? How is this going to benefit our kids? So thank you for being part of that discussion.
Awesome. And I'll just give one more round of thanks. Thanks you to our new superintendent for who has never done a budget before, who just dove right in. Thank you to Maureen for the tireless work. Thank you to the board. Thank you to our admin and our teachers. You guys, it takes a village. I realized I forgot to ask about HASP, but I will put that off till the next one because it is quite late. And I think if everybody is settled, we will get the link out to you probably in a couple of days.
Yes. Maybe
feel free,
Wednesday.
give us your feedback, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
we
to
will
our
get into the
administrators.
details of everything
Yes,
in the budget.
obviously there'll be a presentation.
We are adjourned.
Thank
Thanks.
you.